the how, or when you look at that data, what critical thinking you are putting, how you are moving from this data overload to a strategic advisor is what every talent is moving to. And how you're communicating that is more important than what you're communicating. Sometimes you can have a very, very, very bad results, but if you're showing you know how to fix it and you are fixing it and you're going the right direction, it's very, very important. So I think a lot of things in talent, I look at not just the cultural and the openness and the complexity, but also how do they come across, how do they present, and how do they communicate, and how do they take a very complex problem and make it simple.
Welcome everyone to this episode of Smarter Sourcing. My name is John Pavia, and we are here in Shelton, Connecticut at Mercado Restaurant. This is the latest edition of the Marketplace Hospitality Group's chain of restaurants, and it's right on Bridgeport Avenue. Opened recently, and this place has been killing it. It's an awesome place, and it's right down the street from the North American headquarters of BIC Corporation. And we're lucky enough today to have with us the Global Senior Vice President of Supply Chain, Steeve Yammine. Steve, thanks for joining us.
John, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
We always start out almost every episode with folks talking about their background and their journey of how they got to where they are today. In your case, preparing for this, I was fascinated just to think about your background is so international. You've worked in lots of exotic cities, and for you to now be here in Shelton, Connecticut, at this restaurant, having this interview with us, it's fascinating in and of itself. So I'd love for you to share that with our listeners and our viewers.
Of course. Yeah, Shelton, not the most exotic place that I planned. I was born and raised in the Middle East, did my studies in Europe, and then I started my career there in Europe. And that's how I got expatriated here 20 years ago in Dannon. And that's where I started in beer, then in dairy, then from there to back to beer, I would say, with AB InBev. And then I came to BIC almost 5 years ago, where I was running their procurement at the beginning and indirect. And then I moved to supply chain for the last 4 years, was running their supply chain globally.
So as we sit here today, I think we're sort of coming out of the egg crisis that we've been hearing about, prices of eggs and whatnot. Any surprises when you went from beer to yogurt in terms of, it's a transition. I mean, you're still creating something, and in both cases, something that gets ingested, but different ingredients.
Sure.
So you must have some pretty good stories.
I'll give you one fact, Doug. This is what your question triggers for me. One important fact. In beer, I did not have 24 hours between a cow and a plant, and not 48 hours between a plant and a shelf. So the dairy industry is a fascinating industry and taught me a lot how to deal about shelf life. And you had to be on the shelf in less than 3 days. And if you are not consumed and eaten in 14 days, you're thrown to the garbage, right? So the supply chain connection and being more real time is what we need, by the way, today, is where I learned really the connection. That's very different between beer, even though it's a fermented product, and yogurt is very lot of commonality in terms of process and packaging. But the real time is much faster supply chain, obviously in the fresh dairy, instead of in the beer, it's more 6 to 12 months at least, if not 24 months, depending on the product.
Were you a beer drinker when you got to InBev?
I've always been a beer drinker. Actually, this is what I studied in college, right? Beer and brewing was my master's in France. And that's how I started in the beer industry. I stayed on the weekend too as a brewmaster for the last 25 years. And that's actually what took me from Danone to AB InBev at that time, because somebody came and said, hey, great corporate guy and you have a passion for beer, why don't you bring them together? And I was very tempted. And I left Danone in 2019 and I went to InBev for 2 years, where during COVID time, we were managing all the craft beers in the US. Just fascinating too.
That must be fascinating to you, the explosion of craft beers and breweries and craft breweries.
Of course, that was like a big thing in 2010, 2020, right? It still continues now. It was a massive explosion. And I liked about it outside the beer and the corporate is also these founders who are, for me, more artists, because, craft beers was more an artistic thing than more mass production, right? So it was a nice balance between the people side, the profit, and the purpose of it.
I'm still fascinated by athletic brewing and the popularity of non-alcoholic beer.
Right.
They're right here in Connecticut.
Correct. Oh, fascinating. It's amazing products that are growing, especially non-alc. But then Listen, what also made me a big transition in my life outside beer is after I learned all this in food, I was also fascinated about very complex supply chain. And that's what brought me to BIC, because it's an amazing contradiction between the complexity of the supply chain, but also the simplicity of the product, right? The values of BIC are always about bringing simplicity and joy to our customers every day. Very different from food, which is more around health and agriculture. So I transitioned to BIC in 21, 4 years ago. And that's what is also fascinating is how can you bring 8 billion plus products every day to people's consumer in their hand, the right quality, consistent supply chain, great service level, and in a very simple product that looks simple, but has a huge value and joy to our consumer.
So when I was thinking about this interview, I was thinking about the different products that BIC makes, and I just happened to bump into a Milton Friedman video, famous supply side economist, and he has a famous lecture that he would give where he'd hold up a pencil, and in this case, and in the point of the lecture was to say, let's go through how many hands, how many businesses, how many vendors it takes to create this pencil, get it in a package, and get it on a store shelf somewhere.
Yeah.
Because the pencil just looks so basic. And in your case, BIC pens, BIC shavers, BIC everything. I think to the average person, they don't seem like complicated products. But making sure that these things are produced high quality and delivered and on a shelf when they're supposed to be, how would you describe it to people about how complex that is?
Yeah, I will tell you one thing. First thing, I'm pretty sure he talked about a big pencil and a big pen, not any pen. I'm sure he talked about this or a different crystal. But also, I'm pretty sure this is not a big pencil. I'll give you
okay, I'm going to take a bit.
I'm going to put this in the garbage.
Yeah, throw that one out.
But what is interesting, like this is one of the most complex we have. We have also the crystal pen. Let me see, I always have one with me.
And these are the ones like we get in, like back in school where we have 4 different colors, right?
Yeah, amazing. And we have so many graphics with them. And I have a big collection of this, actually. I have more than 100 graphics of this at home. There's a lot of people collect this. But even the simplest one, which is this crystal pen, we think it's just a pen and you write on. But first of all, like there's more than 11 components that goes into this, right? And not even mentioning the ink, which is by itself many different chemicals to make an amazing ink that can last forever. There's so many patents we have on this. And just the ball point itself, it's a complexity where you bring so many components for so many places, right? We are vertically integrated, so we make everything that goes into this. Even the plastic, we buy the resin ourselves, we make cartridges ourselves, we make the ink, we put it all together from different factories, and at the end, one factory put it all together. And this is not the end of the supply chain, it's just the beginning. Because then we take those blue pens and we ship them to places where we co-pack blue pens and green pens and yellow pens into one packaging, right? So that the complexity of making sure you have the right mix of products is massive. And then that you have to put on the pallets and ship it to customers across the world, right? To so many factories we have around the world and more than 100 stops of warehouses and distribution centers, it makes it pretty complex, right? We operate in all 5 regions around the world and with a massive complexity behind it and number of SKUs, right? So at the end, we do have an amazing service level and that's what consumers sees and an amazing quality. And that's what we are very proud of.
So I would imagine during COVID and the massive disruption we had in the supply chain, it was for the first time for, I think, 99% of the world, but let's just take America, the first time that the average person who probably heard the word supply chain thousands of times in their lifetime, but never stopped to say to themselves, so what is the worldwide supply chain, right? Yeah. And did you get that question? Like when that was happening and now people were really focused on why isn't there toilet paper in the grocery store? So what is going on? What basic things, the first time, things that people take for granted. You must have got a ton of questions. Like
all the time. I remember before 2020, nobody wanted supply chain or even procurement or anybody in the meeting room, right? It was all about sales and marketing. But obviously, since there was no toilet paper, everybody wanted to hear why. And the first questions were like, what is even supply chain, right? And now fast forward 5 years into it, they absolutely want to know about supply chain, especially like now because of COVID too. I mean, you see what's happening around the world and tariffs and changes of economy. So very, very fundamental. I think back in the days, they used to say future CEO, you have to be a chief marketing officer. I think the ones who runs their supply chain right are tomorrow's leaders of companies, right? So I think if you get the supply chain right, you can have a huge competitive advantage compared to others. And that's something that people realized after COVID.
How did just give us maybe a story or two of how, because this is something I've heard now from several people, which is prior to COVID, supply chain folks, they may get invited to those senior executive meetings that were just below the ELT. And then post-COVID, they now have a seat at the table.
Yep.
Have you seen that firsthand?
Yeah, of course, all the time, right? Like there's a lot of things we think in silos on companies, right? And you have functions sometimes, even within supply chain, you have people who does just planning alone, manufacturing alone, sourcing, procurement alone, and delivering alone, right? Logistics. What connects the dots is the end-to-end. We have the same at board levels, right? Sometimes, marketing does something, sales does something, finance does something, supply chain does something. It doesn't connect that way. You can't, at the end, deliver those products to the consumer and customers at the right price, the right quantity. So we see it at that level, we see it at the lower level, and we strive every day to create the end-to-end inside supply chain, but inside every function. So yeah, it's happening a lot more. It's not perfect, but breaking silos in the companies to make sure the entire supply chain works is the way to be.
So let's talk a little bit more now, specifically about BIC, what you're doing today, the way you're structured. You have about 20 factories in 45 different countries, and you make a variety of products. So how are you structured in terms of your team, and how do you make sure you got air traffic control watching the entire globe?
Yeah, so good question. Air traffic control. Our air traffic control is planning, right? So we have teams in the regions that are very dedicated on planning. Really, if you plan right, usually the entire supply chain pays that good bill, right? So everything goes well according to plan, if your planning goes well. So we have teams, and we moved our supply chain to become much more regional. And one of our pillars of the strategy is regionalization, which we learned through COVID. But becoming where really the demand is and where the customers are is what every supply chain in the world learned. And we did it in BIC, right? We regionalized our supply chain. So we have planning teams sitting in the regions instead of sitting globally. And they really connect better with our sales and our customers on where the demand is. So making sure the demand planning and supply planning connect well. And our inventory team in the regions is something that we really strived and we built. So that's one piece of, I would say, in terms of organization. And we also have a piece that is also sitting in the regions, which we call customer excellence. It's all the logistics and customer service, how you get your orders, making sure you have them in the warehouse, make sure you have enough blue pens and green pens in the same box. We co-pack them well and you deliver them to the customers. And that's also in the regions, in the teams. And then our procurement organizations is between global and regional. So we said, even in our strategy, we are globally leveraged, but regionally connected. So buying plastics, we buy it globally. But obviously, when we are buying things that are very regional, like indirect, very regionally connected. So that organization is in between. Then our plants, we have a lot of good plants around the world. They are locally focused, I would say. They make the best product on the best quality. They all report to a manufacturing organization. They're kind of a supplier for our supply chain, right? Where we ask them to make products for us every day, and then they make the best product for us, and they supply us. And that organization reports to a peer of me who runs all our manufacturing organization.
So how many people in your organization?
So today in BIC, in supply chain, we roughly have around 7,000 to 8,000 people. Wow. Obviously, 5,000 of them or 6,000, I would say, are in the plants and the warehouses where they're really making the product. Yep. That's where the majority of our people are. And then the rest are in the, let's say, offices that we have around the world and in our co-packing centers where they deliver to the customers, right?
Is there a country in the world that there's no BIC products?
Is there a country in the world with no BIC products? That's an interesting question. I don't know if they're going to find me an island where there is no BIC product, but I think our products are everyday product, not just pens, even lighters and shavers. I would think even though we operate in 50 plus countries, we probably sell our product in more than 180. So probably in every single country you have. Yes, some countries, they're still transferring from matches to
Right.
lighters, right? So it's we are expanding every day, our lighters business, but also our lead excellence business and our stationary business. We also bought a lot of acquisitions the last couple of years. Our recent one is Tangle Teaser, which is our detangler product, amazing product. I personally cannot use it much, obviously, but it's my daughters love it.
I'm sure we have a couple in our house.
I'm pretty
wife and
sure.
daughters. Like, there's always another product.
Exactly.
Here's
So
something product.
those are amazing products too that we bought that complement our portfolio. And we are actually in the phase of integrating the supply chain of it. I was in Charlotte last week, and the first Tangle Teaser product will be shipped from Charlotte in the next quarter we have ahead of us. So very exciting products. It's also
Is that a departure for BIC to get into a hair care product? That
No, it's not. It's actually complementary to what we have. It goes along our blade excellence, I would say, categories, and also human expression. We are more and more expanding into grooming, I would say, and goes along those lines of grooming. You know, we have a lot of our competitors do similar things. It's not only about how you shave, but also how you look.
I wanted to ask you about going back to planning for a second, because sort of a common theme that I've heard from lots of people in supply chain and procurement is the amount of contingency planning that they do today post-COVID versus what they did pre-COVID. But you know, they'll all say that we did contingency planning for the what if, but how that's gone to a whole different level now since COVID, because who's to say something else doesn't happen in the next couple of years? And especially some folks telling me that they've since hired military people who are very good at contingency planning as part of their everyday life. Tell me about your experience. Was it always a case where a lot of priority put on it, or is it even more so now?
No, listen, I think we learned more about that as we went through COVID and went through the VUCA world we're living in. But I would say at the beginning was a lot about contingency planning through mainly inventory and let's buy more so we can be ready on many scenarios. But what evolved to, because we learned very fast, you can't do everything through inventory. It costs you a lot of money. We learned into scenario mapping, and that contingency moved into making different scenarios and being ready for every scenario or every scenario you can imagine. And being digitally ready and be real time, you can activate every scenario based on the scenario, because you cannot have contingency on every scenario. It will cost you a fortune, and you can never predict all the scenarios anyway. But if you're able to map the scenarios and have digital tools to say, hey, what happened if this goes up? What happened if this goes down? And be ready for it and practice on it, you'll be able to react much faster and just build a bunch of safety stock and then say, I'm ready for everything.
So then address redundancy for me, because in your world, in anybody in your position, redundancy is, you can't be hung up by one of your vendors, one of your suppliers, right? You got to be, but I guess my question is, in the world of redundancy and preparedness, is that different now than it was?
Of course, It's not because we regionalized that we near-shored everything from, let's say, Asia Pacific to the regions. We also made sure we have dual sourcing across the entire supply chain. I think before COVID, even though redundancy was there, we were still, all the companies, very driven into, let's go to the cheapest place and forget which one is less agile, right? Now that we learn agility is super important. Redundancy brings more agility instead of just contingency, right? Back in the days it was just contingency. Now it's about agility. It's very important to keep two sourcing, if not three sourcing, and also in different regions. Not everything has to be in the same region. Although we regionalized, we also kept things that are not necessarily in the single one regions, because things can happen in the same region. So I think it's important to keep the balance between regions and also globals, right? Which bring me to the point that I was talking about. But absolutely, yes, like we are today on all our sourcing upstream on terms of suppliers, but also the way we put our plants, we put our co-packing center. We have things even North America and Mexico, but also we have a lot of things in the US too. So we have ability to shift one place to another very quickly.
So in reading a little bit about your philosophy on supply chain, on some of these issues that we're talking about, you made a comment that you wanted to bring to BIC, and what you pride yourself on is the agility, the efficiency, and sustainability of BIC's supply chain. So we talked already a little bit about agility, efficiency. Tell me about the sustainability part, because I mean, whether it's this, I mean, you got ink in here, you got plastic, So you're dealing with products that people, especially environmentalists, are very focused on in terms of what do you do with them when you're done and whatnot. So tell us about sustainability in your world.
So obviously sustainability is a big deal for us, right? Because we do use a lot of, not only plastic, a lot of materials, right, on all those products. And we made massive commitments in 2018 and 2020 on reduction of our carbon footprint and our CO2 and our plastic consumptions. And we're ahead of those curves on all the deliveries. We actually done many initiatives with our suppliers, but even ourselves, we engineered our products. Actually, I'll give you 2 or 3 examples. Even on pens, we created pens that are made 78% of their plastic with ocean plastic, right? The plastic you find in the ocean, we recycle it and make pens from it. So those are
the plastic that when they gather up all the waste on beaches and whatnot.
You see them in those nice videos around the world.
I've seen those 2 young guys that created that business that they
gather all the plastics and make pens from it, right? We did it in every category. Same with our lighter divisions. We have Easy Load is, instead of having the big barbecue lighters where you use it and then after many months or years, depends how many times you barbecue, you throw it away. There's lighters now where you can put it in the back, you easy load it and just to re-click it. So every time you're out of it, you take another lighter and put it back in. And that's 2 small examples, but there's many others. Actually, it brings me back to the point I was hammering, which is regionalization. By regionalizing, you're actually moving a lot less product around the world and making them closer to the consumers, reduces your carbon footprint massively. The second piece, if you plan better, then you make less product and you use them only when it's needed, you have a better footprint of CO2. In BIC last year, we reduced our footprint of logistics between all those massive plants and co-packing centers by more than 27%, just by planning better through better technology, through better, let's say, capabilities inside the company. So that alone, we should not underestimate the sustainability of the company is not in the product only, but also in the footprint of the supply chain that makes that product. That's a lot of time we underestimate. We just look at the product at the end, we say, okay, let's reduce plastic by another 5%, right? But if you are able to make this product in a more efficient way, that scope 2 and scope 3 is more important. Actually, in the dairy, what you implicate there and with the farmers has much bigger impact on agriculture than it has in the finished product that you have with the consumer.
With an organization that is spread out and regionalized, talk to me about culture, grooming talent, because it gets more difficult as people get spread out, and especially when you have, an office in one country versus multiple countries. How do you build, maintain culture, and also try to reconcile sometimes with some things they're not going to be totally assimilated, but they had learned to have to coexist?
Yeah, listen, I was lucky enough to live in 3 different regions. As I say, Middle East, Europe, and North America. Spent a lot of time in Latin America too. And yes, I do speak 6 languages, and it's not enough to connect all the cultures around the world. It's fascinating, right? I think we always say people first is absolutely people first, right? If you have that connection between the people, the rest of the business, supply chain, or anything you can call it, is much easier, right? So I spend a lot of time on planes to connect those people, not just talk to them, but really understand and really read in between the lines, because there's a lot of lines. If you say them exactly the same way in every different region, they're understood very differently. So I think I strive of creating teams that are very diverse, female, male diversity, very important, but also cultural diversity is very important too across the world, right? People who are able to operate in 2 countries, for me, have an edge on the people who only worked in one country. People who lived in different places, who were able to understand not only the culture, how the entire supply chain connect to the global economy is super important. Anything we're deciding right now is based not only how supply chain is reacting, it's actually how the global economy is moving, especially with nowadays, not only the tariffs and all the moves we have around the world, is impacting a lot our supply chain, and our supply chain is reacting differently, right? So the know-how of selecting the right people, make sure they are developing and they're bringing their diversity, and listening to them helps you better understand the global economy and getting a better supply chain.
So your background must come in handy for BIC. I'm assuming it has, when it comes to the integrations or the acquisitions that it's made outside the U.S., especially in areas where you've
I think so.
You had experience being, and have you said, is that coming
Yeah, I
through?
think so. Listen, I speak French, and in BIC, with it being French company, it does help a lot when you are calling our headquarters in Paris, right? So it did help me in BIC, and for sure, even in Danone was a French company, right? I always learned how to work for a European company who have a very heavy North American presence, right? Almost 50% of the business is in North America, but we still, a lot of our factories and our headquarters are in Paris. Similar in Danone, similar in BIC. So I learned how to sometimes explain to North Americans how Europe works and how Europeans, how North American works, right? So it did help me. I'm not perfect. I don't get it right every time. Actually, most of the time I don't get it right, but sometimes it does help.
You talked about people who have spent time in other countries, worked in other regions, how they immediately feel a little bit of an advantage. What are some of the other things that you're looking for when we're talking about talent? Because we are seeing it today more and more where you have kids majoring in supply chain, sourcing, procurement, and you actually are seeing more and more universities have focused curriculums on this where you didn't years ago. But in addition to the things you already talked about, what are you looking for when you're looking to add to your team?
So here's a simple way I look at when I interview people, for example, right? When I select people on the team, I used to look at how 60% weight and the what was 40% weight. Now I'm not 60-40 anymore, I'm 80-20. The 80% on the how. It's a big deal. More you grow an organization and more you select more senior people, the how matters more than the what. The what, everybody can learn it. Actually, AI gonna do it on your behalf pretty soon, or is already doing it. But the how, or when you look at that data, what critical thinking you are putting, how you are moving from this data overload to a strategic advisor is what every talent is moving to. And how you're communicating that is more important than what you're communicating. Sometimes you can have a very, very, very bad results, but if you're showing you know how to fix it and you are fixing it and you're going the right direction, it's very, very important. So I think a lot of things in talent, I look at not just the cultural and the openness and the complexity, but also how do they come across, how do they present, and how do they communicate, and how do they take a very complex problem and make it simple.
It's funny, so I have 4 kids, all
Me too.
3 in their 20s and 1 in their 30s, and I tell them that I think the biggest differentiator right now when it comes to selecting from candidates for a position is how effective they communicate. And I don't want to start going down the path, down the rabbit hole of kids are spending too much time on phones and not learning how to, but I'll tell you, it's so important in the work environment, in any environment, but especially when you're in an environment like yours, especially when you have people in different areas of the country, being able to effectively communicate a problem, a solution, whatever. And I don't know if enough time is being spent, especially like in the college years, emphasizing the importance of effective communication.
100% agree. I have the same thing with my kids, right? And I tell them the same thing. They probably don't listen neither, but that's what they're going to learn, right? Like, I think the content they see in education is a lot about the what, probably 80-20, but the opposite direction. The how is so important. And also, just to add, the last 5 to 10 years with digital media, and there's so much more information out there, it's very hard for people to know where exactly is the problem and what exactly to do about it, right? And which one is the reliable source. Because everybody, I said this joke last time, 2 weeks ago at one of the plants, somebody came and said, hey, I did a research over the weekend on this study. I said, hey, how many TikTok videos you saw? What do you mean I did the research? Like, tell me more. A lot of people just look at this social media, they communicate, they did a very long study, but they haven't done like an MIT PhD on it, right? So we need to also select people who are able to communicate what is the right information to focus on. Because if you flow into this massive world of data, there's a lot of it who is not good.
That's a great segue, because I wanted to ask you, digitization in all aspects of life, but in your world, right?
Yeah.
And as we talk about selecting talent and screening talent, combine those two topics in terms of let's say you're talking in front of a classroom full of MBAs who have a focus in supply chain, and you get to the end of your lecture and you're giving them advice about, beyond just the forensic, but now about digitalization in the world of supply chain. And because there's so much data out there, sometimes it's hard to figure out what's the best way to use digital information. What's your advice to them?
I would tell them, use digitization for sure, big time. You have to invest. Like, the world already moved on. If you are still questioning, is AI going to take over or not, it's already here to stay and it's already happening. So spend a lot of time on digitization, but understand that is not even 50% of the equation. Back to my 80-20, it's only the what, the digitization, right? You need the how, people who are going to understand this data and, let's say, transfer it to a actionable business acumen that you're going to need to spend on. So when you do a lot of data on digital, please put money on it, put your investment, put your CapEx, move out from Excel, put your massive tools that exist. That's normal. You need to move from a horse to a car, but you still need drivers. Right? I'm not a big fan of completely autonomous planning yet, right? Maybe in 5 to 10 years. But I think there are a lot of technologies there that are fit for perfect product who don't have high volatility, who don't need, let's say, a lot of attention. We can give autonomous, let's say, technology on it. But the rest gonna need still a lot of intervention, even to make sure our machines are learning better. Humans still need to add a lot of, let's say, input to those digital tools, right? So I'm a big fan of digitization, and I think a lot of companies are doing a lot of mistakes by not investing enough. But also, if you don't continue to support it into learning and development with the team, those digital tools or will die or something else will come and replace them, right? So you need to also, I've seen it in the Gartner takeaway, I think it was 2 weeks ago in their symposium. And they did say, they did a survey, said by 2028, 2030, some of the tools will die because we're not creating enough capability behind it in the teams to learn it and evolve it even more. Somebody else will come and take out that tool and sell you a better car, but you need to continue to improve those cars that you just created.
How much has BIC gotten into humanoid robotics?
Listen, we are in the first steps. I just came from Charlotte, as I said. We are investing there, one of the most advanced technology in a warehouse. It's called an ASRS. It's an automatic retrieval system of pallets. Amazing, like 30,000 locations with robots everywhere and the state of the art. We're investing heavily in North Carolina right now to manage complexity. That's obvious, right? We did it. AI is something we just started on demand planning and machine learning in general. We are in the first steps. We're using some RPAs in procurement, I would say. We are catching up. I think we haven't done enough the last 5 years, and we are putting a lot of money behind it the last 2 to 3 years. When I say we're catching up, it's good, but also the technology is evolving too, right? Whatever we're implementing now, I think the boom of technology is faster than the speed of companies on implementing.
I want to finish with this. And I don't want to get political, but I do want to know from a business standpoint, with tariff conversations going on right now, with you guys being global, how much is that not throwing off your business, but throwing you for a loop? Always a curveball every morning. What keeps you up at night as it relates to these tariffs, and how are you managing it?
So what keeps me at night is, how do I keep the supply chain so stable so I don't change it at the same speed than the tariff discussions, right? Because listen, it does cost a lot of money and a lot of time to move a line or a factory from one country to another, right? And by the time you do that, sometimes the entire ecosystem of tariffs or any other political aspect, you can't change, right? So we're trying to adapt while we are keeping our supply chain stable and continuous so we can continue good service levels, right? And of course, it's affecting everybody, not just BIC. What I can tell you too is every single move we have done in the last 3 to 5 years in our strategy, I mentioned regionalization, helped us a lot to be in a better shape right now. Digitization helped us to be more agile and more real-time to adapt to tariffs and other things. So the good news is it's not changing massively what we are doing. It's actually accelerating the momentum that we're already creating.
That's great. Listen, we covered a lot in whatever it was, but 30 to 35 minutes. This was great. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me, John. I always enjoy it. I can speak for hours for this, as you can imagine. But thanks for inviting me.
It's been great. And for everybody who's listening and tuning in, thank you for joining us. Again, my name is John Pavia, and this is Smarter Sourcing, and we'll look for you on our next episode. Take care.